Listen-only mode.
Welcome to our webinar, End Child Labor in Supply Chains, It's Everyone's Business, presented by Beth Tiger and Kendra Debris of Durga Tree International. Before I introduce today's presenters, I'd like to go over how this webinar will work. First of all, you will be able to view the presentation on your computer screen. You will be able to hear the presentation through your computer's audio system. Please feel free to ask questions by typing them in. We will monitor your questions and stop occasionally to answer all questions. Any questions not answered in today's webinar will be addressed after the webinar is completed. And now I'd like to introduce today's topic and speakers. Beth Tiger has been an activist since her early 20s. Beth is passionate about every person having the basic right of freedom over their own bodies and lives and has dedicated herself full-time to this mission. Having been a life coach, Beth Tiger brings to her executive position a level of empathy and compassion to all those she serves through her work with survivors and partner organizations. She has authored a best-selling book and has been an inspirational speaker for over 10 years. This skill set helps her to convey the vision of Durga Tree and empower donors with information needed to make educated decisions around anti-trafficking. Beth's work and personal life have always been centered on service in some form, and she has had the honor of sitting on several charitable boards in New Jersey whose focuses are human rights, homelessness, and equality for all people. When the epidemic of modern slavery here in the U.S. and abroad was brought to her and her husband's attention, they both felt compelled to take the next step in their philanthropic lives. This resulted in the founding of Durga Tree International. Kendra Debris is the Business Development Director of Durga Tree International, an anti-trafficking organization located in Sparta, New Jersey. Having earned her bachelor's at William Patterson University and progressively working for specialty retailers for more than 10 years, Kendra shifted her focus to nonprofit management after realizing the depth of need for industry leaders. Kendra learned of the harsh realities of human trafficking while volunteering her time at Durga Tree International's second annual Fall Gala in 2014. Being a mother to a 1-year-old girl at the time, Kendra became instantly passionate about every child having the basic right of freedom over their own bodies and lives, and has dedicated herself full-time to this mission ever since. Working in collaboration with co-founders and Bergen County residents, Beth and Tim Tiger, along with their niece and educator, Jess Hortel, Durga Tree International has managed to raise over $300,000 in single donations for their projects and programs across the globe. Today, Beth and Kendra will educate you on all child labor throughout the world and how we can all help. Child labor denies girls and boys their rights to be safe from harm, to quality education and vocational training, and to play and rest. Freedom from child labor is a fundamental human right millions of children have been stripped from across the globe. Immediate measure must be taken now to eradicate forced labor and modern slavery and human trafficking in the 21st century. In honor of the 2016 World Day Against Child Labor, Beth Tiger, Executive Director and co-founder of Durga Tree International, along with WP alumna Kendra Debris, present this interactive and informative presentation on modern-day child trafficking and our interpersonal connection to this growing epidemic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Beth Tiger and Kendra Debris from Durga Tree International.
Thank you so much, Tara. And thank you, Sharon, for giving us the opportunity today to educate my fellow alumni. And just quickly, I want to reiterate our mission at Durga Tree International. We focus on the solution. We educate and economically empower survivors of modern-day slavery. Durga Tree International, we support programs around the world which enable survivors to become thrivers, keeping not only them, but the next generation out of the slavery cycle. We do this by collaborating with various vetted nonprofits around the world already on the ground doing this incredible work. We are also committed to educating local U.S. communities, such as this community here, about the many facets of slavery, including their individual relationship to this growing epidemic. We had the opportunity back in March to have CNBC come and visit our office space, and they did an incredible expose on slavery in the 21st century, which is available through our website. We'll give you some more information at the end on some of the sources that we have and resources that are available to you. But we're going to get this webinar started with just a quick 2-minute video in regards to what CNBC pulled together.
The more we learned and the more we began to understand how prevalent human slavery, modern slavery is, we felt that we really needed to do something. And we felt that fundraising was a really important aspect because slavery is an economic disease. The Durga community is a community of abolitionists. And so we're not going to eradicate slavery unless we create a movement of people who care. And that's the abolitionists. But we often don't think that we're playing a part in it. And I think that most people today would never consciously play a part in the trafficking boom. But our demand for cheap goods, our consumerism and the amount that we consume has caused a demand for cheap labor and, sadly, slave labor.
Okay. So as I said before, through collaboration, education, and economic empowerment, we can bring an end to modern slavery. And yes, the topic of today's conversation is child labor. So I'm going to introduce and open it up to Beth Tiger, where she's going to interconnect these two facets. What's the difference? Modern slavery, child labor. What do all of these things mean? And how do these components, how do they all come together? So Beth Tiger, please educate us all today.
Well, I'm really glad to be here today because this is an epidemic that's continuing to grow and not decline. 3 years ago, when we formed Durga Tree International, it was the third most profitable black market business, slavery. Today, it is the second most profitable black market business, second only to drugs. Guns and illegal weapons is third today. That means it's a whopping $150 billion illegal business per year. So although slavery, a practice which was successfully eradicated in the 19th century, most people think is gone, is a flourishing underworld business. And there is a direct correlation to poverty, to child labor, to the vulnerable, and to the booming market of slavery today. Approximately 21 million people around the world, about 3 out of every 1,000 individuals, and 5 million of them right today are children, are victims of forced labor. That's according to a recent estimate in the International Labor Organization reports. However, that estimate was taken a few years ago, so we don't even know today what that estimate is. It's very hard to determine how many people are involved in forced labor. I'd like to step back to the slavery component because I want to tie it in. I want to create a tapestry for you all to understand. The victims of who are modern-day slaves are 66% women, 13% girls, 12% men, and 9% boys. So when you do the math, the majority of those who are enslaved are women and their children. And that is also a lot of those who are involved in forced labor. And obviously, when we're talking about child labor, that's a huge stepping stone. So what is child labor? Kendra, I'd love for you to show some slides, and I will continue to move on. What is, sorry, Kendra, you have the modern day slavery. What is it? Modern day slavery is commercial sexual exploitation. It's forced labor. It's bonded labor. A lot of people don't understand what bonded labor means. When somebody comes and they think they're working for $100 a week, and then at the end of the month they're told that, you know, their rent or their what they're obligated to pay that, you know, that person on the farm or in the, you know, in the mine is $1,000, suddenly there's a debt of $500. So they become bonded to the company, to the individual, to the farm. And what do you think happens if they have 2 children? Maybe their 2 children can work that off, or if they have a family member. So that's bonded labor. Domestic work. The United States has a lot of domestic workers who are forced to be here. They come thinking that they're going to get their green card. They come with that expectation and hope. Their passports are taken from them, and then they are forced to be here. And if they have children, their children are also forced into other forms of labor. Child soldiers. A lot of people don't think that the children around the world that are involved in the wars many of them are kidnapped and forced to be there. They're not, what child decides they want to go off to war willingly? And there's a picture of this little boy holding a gun. That is not something that was created in Hollywood. That is a real photograph in Africa. I mean, that's so disturbing. There's forced begging. People are put out on the streets to beg for gangs. And when they're on those streets, especially children, oftentimes they're kidnapped, they're networked into the sexual exploitation industry. So it's all interconnected. And that's why I said I'd love to weave a tapestry here, because sadly, forced labor, child labor, and slavery are all connected and very, very profitable. There's also organ trafficking, which many people are horrified to think about, and we think it's one of the most horrific forms of trafficking. In West Cameroon, Africa, where we helped to build a school, they kidnap children there, predominantly children, vulnerable children, walking to and from school, and they're kidnapped and put on the black market for their organs. And who do you think's purchasing organs? It's the wealthy. It's you know, Western European. It's those that can afford that. So this is an exploitation of the poor. Modern day slavery takes place everywhere around the world. There's really no place that we're immune to this disease of economics. And if you look at this graph, there's an estimated 31 million slaves in the world, but that's estimated when you think about young women who are sold into forced marriages, people behind closed doors. We don't know how to truly estimate this. And that's why I don't love to give facts and figures, because I find that, you know, the more I hear on the underground, you know, conversations with the directors around the world, the people that we're working with, this is an epidemic that is so high now. We don't even have any idea how many people. There's also an image on the right-hand side. These are the hot spots of trafficking that's taking, or slavery that's taking place right here in the United States. You know, when you look at California, you look at the Portland areas, you're looking, a lot of the trafficking takes place in main ports, the import and exportation of people, also the importation and exportation of goods, where there's a lot of farming, you know, and where there's also people coming up from Central and South America. They're looking to come to a better place to live. So that's where it's happening. It's happening everywhere. But when people say to me, you know, well, why is it happening in one place more than another? I'm going to tell you that it's a population issue. Where there's more poor, there's more people to exploit. You know, why is this growing? We've had a population boom in the last 150 years. There's more people than ever before. There's more poor people than ever before. There's a middle class throughout the world that's declining. And you don't have to make this product. The poor are making it for you. So that's something to think about also. You have to make drugs. You have to make guns. You don't have to make a poor person or a vulnerable person. They're out there just for the taking. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If not, we can go right into the child labor piece.
Nothing, but feel free to type in any questions if you see anything as Beth and Kendra are talking.
This image was taken by my daughter, who is 16, down at a shelter in Guatemala City. And this little boy is the byproduct of abuse and trafficking, and his mother was 12. I really want you all to think about that. His mother was 12. That means she was 11 when she had this little boy. This is a country that is connected to our country on many levels. The amount of sexual exploitation that happens from people traveling from the United States down to Guatemala for indigenous and fetish type situations is very high. The amount of labor and agricultural trafficking that takes place down there is also quite high. And those are interconnected. Where there's a young, vulnerable person who's being trafficked in the fields, chances are they are also vulnerable to be sexually trafficked as well. So that's just something to consider. What is child labor? You know, a lot of times people go, you know, child labor is good, and children go get a job and they're helping their families. That's a good thing, and it is a good thing. It's not about a child who's working to develop, you know, good self-worth, working towards something for themselves, working after school, working to form discipline. Child labor refers to anything that deprives a child of their childhood, their potential, and their dignity. And it's also harmful to their physical and mental development. That's what we're talking about when we talk about child labor. And that, to me, right then and there, is a form of slavery. You're denying our next generation their education, their health, and their opportunity to become the next generation of change agents and you know, potential, all the potential for our planet. So I think it's huge. These are pictures that were taken by a photographer who did an expose around the world on trafficking. And we obviously have the definitions here. Work that's mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children. I want you to look at the image of these children. They are in a brick manufacturing facility. Think about what they're breathing in. Think about how harmful that is to them. Work that also, you know, deprives them of, deprives them of the opportunity to attend school. But the image here is a woman in a brothel. That's a brothel. That's not a woman, that's actually a child. she's not 18, and she's a child. And so she's being denied the opportunity to obviously go to school and anything like that. But it's horrific to think that that's a brothel and that she's being sexually exploited every single day. Child labor, work that requires them to attempt to combine school attendance with excessively long and heavy work hours. A lot of people aren't thinking about stone. Where does our, you know, we're really lovers of granite, you know, bluestone, all kinds of quarried stone. And I think a lot of us aren't even thinking about who's mining that stone. And this is a real picture. What's happening to their backs, to the development of their bodies? It's mind-blowing to me. Slavery does still exist in every country around the world. This is a picture that Lisa Christine took. This is a gold mine. These people are standing in mercury water. That's how you mine gold. This little baby is right there. What's happening to the development of not only him, but his mother and the next generation? I feel that it's very important for all of us to see these images because we play a direct part in the profits and in the promotion of child labor and modern day slavery by our consumerism, by our demand for goods without knowing who's producing those goods. We're interested in maybe the designer or the label or where it comes from, but we're not thinking about how it's being mined. And this for me also ties into our planet, our care for our Mother Earth. If we're doing this to human beings, what do you think we're doing to the planet here? What do you think? Do you think that there's some sort of standard that's happening in this mine to ensure that our Earth is not being polluted? So gold, brick and stone is another form of modern day slavery and child labor. mining. When I look at this picture and we think, I don't know if many of you are familiar with so many of the ads that talk about, I think it's mesothelioma, and a lot of the cancers that we know have taken place from unsafe mining practices. And that happens all around the world right now. That's happening all around the world. And these little children. Fashion and textiles is a huge one. I want you all to take a close look at those hands. Those hands are dyed. They're not just, they can't go and just wash them off. The dyes are not safe. They're toxic. And it's a father and his children. And so again, they're dyeing textiles that are used in clothing that we put on our bodies. They're using dyes and toxic manufacturing facilities to create leather goods that we wear, that we have our purses and our jackets. And then again, the pollution, there's just there's this weaving of lack of care for human life and a lack of care for our planet. So that leads me into why. And we chose this picture because I do a lot of talking about being an empowered person. And I believe it's self-consumption, not consumerism. It's self-consumption. How many pairs of leggings do we need? How many Christmas presents do we need? Are we even thinking about why we're buying these products? This is a picture of a Black Friday, and I believe it's probably a Target. It was online, and people are rushing in to get a great deal. And they're not even thinking about where these products come from. I mean, we could spend hours showing you pictures of people in China, children in China, making Christmas ornaments for us in toxic facilities. And, the IT around the phones, our cell phones, our electronics. So we've got this twofold issue here, because I look back at history, and when I look back at history and I think about any of the cultures that exploited the many for the few, those cultures, those societies didn't last long. Because it's like a scale. If there's a handful on this side and there's hundreds on the other side of the scale, what happens? It flops over. And I'd love to just take you back into history a little. I'm a history buff, and I think about ancient Rome, and I think about how ancient Rome self-consumed. It destroyed itself through its consumption. It leads to mental illness. It leads to depression. It leads to a level of dissatisfaction. Again, not even thinking about everyone that they were exploiting. We think about, the taxes that were collected there. We know these stories. We know it doesn't work. We think it's horrific that they went in and they exploited cultures. They taxed them. They took their natural resources. But what's happening today? What's happening today, especially with children and vulnerable? Please.
So how long has this been happening, that this situation right now, that you feel like, is it going to implode?
Absolutely. There's a great movie, if anybody's interested in the fashion and textile industry, there's a great movie called True Cost, the movie. True Cost, the movie. And they kind of talk about fast fashion and and the increase of our consumerism. And when we think of, after the war, World War II, people started acquiring what we would like to think of as the American dream, but even rebuilding Europe. So there was this time of prosperity, and in the 50s and 60s, the majority of clothing around the world, including here in the United States, was made in the specific area. So in the U.S., we bought in the U.S. I'm not proposing that. I love that we're a global economy, that we're a global world, that there's all of these resources and that we can kind of weave them together. But what's happened is, just like kind of ancient Rome, there became this consumerism where we thought, well, if we start manufacturing outside, we can have a cheaper product here. People can have more. So when you think of, when did that take place? The 70s, the 80s, and really the 80s and the 90s is when fast fashion really took off. It's not 4 seasons anymore. It's like 12 seasons of clothing, right? So think about it. You get I get a catalog, 2 weeks later, I get another catalog. It's all new stuff. Where's that stuff going? Number one. But who's manufacturing that stuff so quickly at a cheap rate that you can, if you walk into a store and you buy something for $3, who's not getting paid? Don't think it's the mall. Don't think it's the big corporation, or even the person who works for the corporation in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why I said, many companies can stay within a level of integrity, but then they just outsource. And there are so many poor countries that the governments are even behind the exploitation of their people. But how long can this last? It can't.
And it's accelerating because of the internet.
Exactly. Exactly. And I also think too, innocently, there's a disconnection. And so that the reason why that I talk a lot about self-consumption, there's another picture. Can you show them? Mm-hmm. This is the English regime in India. And I was in Calcutta in January. The English had to change culturally how they lived. I mean, so they couldn't just take over countries anymore and exploit India. It didn't work. I mean, it was imploding. So when you exploit like that, it doesn't work. And that's my big concern, even for my children and my children's future, is that this can't last this way. It's exponentially growing. It's not good for the environment. And I do suggest that if anybody have the time on Netflix, watch True Cost, the movie, for sure. But the other thing too is, if any of you are into science and you think about quantum law is matter. And we know that we're all connected. I love this quote by Einstein: everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy, this is physics. With the increase of our consumerism, there's also an increase in depression and our apathy. It's almost like we're looking outside of ourselves to fill ourselves with something else. But also, if we can call India, if I can be doing this webinar right now and everyone can be listening to it, the horrors that are happening around this world are happening to us. So many of my clients would come to me and go, I don't know why I feel so dissatisfied, why I feel sad. It's physics, it's quantum law, what's happening, the atrocities that are happening to people are happening to us. Look at Orlando. But Orlando is a blip in what's happening every single day to those enslaved around the world. Kendra was with us. We were in Guatemala, and there was a young girl last year that had been rescued, and her sisters were being sexually trafficked. She was 5, and when they picked her up, she'd been trafficked 16 times that day. That energetically, I'm not even getting hokey, that's science, that's physics, that affects us all. We are a global, not economy only, but we're a global society. And so we can't turn a blind eye. We can't think that it doesn't matter what's happening there because we're busy and we need a new phone or we need another new outfit, and it doesn't matter about who's making it. Oftentimes, I laugh, I see all these puppy ads, and it's like, you want to save your dog and give your dog the best food. But if you're giving your dog food that was harvested, the fish were harvested by little slaves in Africa who are being forced to fish in a huge industry in Africa, that dog is ingesting that food. You're wrapping yourself with jewelry. If it's made by somebody who's been enslaved, what are you putting on your body? What are you putting in your body? Oftentimes I'll start my conversation with, do you know who picks your grapes or your strawberries in January? Because in January in New Jersey, cold. So you need those strawberries. You don't even think about it. You should have them because you're entitled to it. You deserve it. You can pay for it. But who's picking them? Oftentimes people will say to me, well, I'd love to eat organic, or I'd love to buy fair trade, but it's expensive. It's expensive if you want to have 50 things, but it's not expensive if you think about how much you truly need. I mean, the more we know, Kendra and I laugh. I'm like, I go into stores and I create the conversation. That's one step too. Who made my stuff? Where does this come from?
I was strawberry picking with my family on Sunday, and we're looking all around, and it's hard work picking strawberries, and it's tiring. And I just started, I can't help but think about who is picking these during the winter time, and explaining to my almost 3-year-old daughter, like just opening up the conversation and letting her know that, we're just so grateful that we can walk into a store and have, a plethora of things at our disposal. But we don't think about, of course, my daughter's growing up in a world where it's so easy. And, and I just thought it was interesting looking around. I took pictures of everyone picking the strawberries, and how long it took to just, gather just a basket full.
Right.
And we're not thinking about, hey, this is a Sunday, and this is an activity, because we want the experience of picking our own strawberries, but somebody picking them day after day, and it's children who can't go to school.
Right.
Because so that my 3-year-old daughter can eat as many strawberries as she wants on a daily basis.
Even the tea gardens, they need little hands and women's hands for the tea gardens. So, with the boom in tea, with the boom in chocolate, so many children, you can go onto YouTube, type in child labor, slavery, chocolate, and there's so many exposés out there. And yet we still go, well, you know what, that matters, but I'm going to buy it. Our consumer dollars are the weapon. I mean, we hold the key. We're either feeding this industry or we're starving it. We're saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's one of the reasons why my husband, myself, and Jess Wortel founded Durga. Is I owned a wellness center, and I was really interested. The center was called A Life Well Lived, and I was very interested in empowering people to live their best life. And so I thought, I'm going to create this conversation about how we support small businesses here in the U.S. and abroad. And I had some items, and I thought I was doing my part with this fair trade idea. But the more I learned about the product piece of it, the more I realized I was fueling an industry that I was working every day to get rid of. And it was just, it was a duality for me. And so, again, it's the conversation that it's not just what happens here, because it is happening here in the United States. And anything, just like drugs and guns, anything that's really profitable will seep into every one of our communities because it's profitable. But, with guns and drugs, if you are illegally trafficking drugs and guns, we have laws already set in place that the punishments are much more severe than pimping, quote unquote, or selling a child. A lot of times, trafficking a human being there's not as much punishment. I mean, so we're not even holding those people accountable. There's a great law that was recently passed right here in New Jersey and now throughout the U.S. called the Safe Harbor Law. And that means when we call somebody under the age of 18 a prostitute, we're doing them a disservice. They're a trafficked child. How can we call them a prostitute when we say that if you're 18, if you're under 18, you're a minor? Who wakes up when they're 10 or 11 or 12 and goes, you know what, today I'm going to sell my body. I think I'm just going to start having sex for money. That's nobody's dream. That's nobody's dream. And it's also nobody's dream to be taken advantage of because they just want to work. And that's really one of the biggest components too. It's exploiting people's need for food and shelter. In people will ask us too, in Guatemala, in India, in Africa, in these areas, who is the person that's becoming the labor slave or the child that's, forced to not go to school anymore? And it's the poor child, it's the poor family who's just looking for the same opportunities we are. They're looking to work, they're looking for shelter, they're looking for food. Oftentimes too, where there's been a natural disaster, when Nepal, Haiti, when there's a natural disaster, the poor become even poorer because now people that had shelter don't have shelter. So now what do you think happens with a really well-organized black market business such as human slavery? They go in, it's very organized. They kidnap, they enslave, they move them away. They move them out of the area, they move them into the cities, and they traffic them, or into the fields, into the mines, into any place where they can exploit them. So, is it possible to move that? But I don't know if any of you have seen The Jungle Book, but it's one of my family's favorite movies. And I love this poem. And the reason why you're looking at the pictures of the cubs and the mothers, or the wolf pack and the tigers, is they care for more than just their own children. We're one of the only mammals that go, if it's happening to my child or in my area, but we're not thinking that the health of our humanity relies on the health of our children. It relies on the well-being of not just our babies, but the babies of our pack, which is our human family. And so my last name is Tiger, and that's why there's a tiger picture there, because I feel very fierce about the children around this world. When I'm with the little ones, when I was in India and I watched the moms who were going to be trafficked bring their daughters and sons to a drop-in center so that they could go to school and potentially have opportunity, you realize that all of parents, every child is someone's child. So whether or not they're our children, we need to care like they are. We need to get fierce about this, because it is directly affecting us. It's affecting our health. It's affecting our ecology. It's affecting the well-being of our planet, and it's affecting our society on a whole. It can't last this way. We look at some of the underlying causes politically of why there's such hate and anger around the world for our culture and our community, and part of it is our lack of concern for the people that are producing the things that we benefit from, and we need those natural resources. So we need to care. When I was in India, one of the girls came up and said, why don't you care? Does Americans not care about what we do? Like, why don't you care? And I said, oh, we do care. And she said, you care because we don't think that you care. So now it's just culturally, they have their own culture and their own systematic breakdowns. But if we're fueling a systematic breakdown where there's the wealthy taking advantage of the poor because the wealthy can make money from our desires and our self-consumption, then do we really care? Even our economy is based on products and not the producer. It's what's gold, what's this, what's that, not who's making that. Now, of course, the sex industry is a huge piece of the profit margins, and so that's why it gets a lot of attention. But why I think Kendra and I wanted to talk about child labor is that's where it starts. When you deny people the ability for education and economic opportunity, you will keep them in a cycle of poverty, slavery, abuse, mental disorder. Those people, if they're so poor, they'll be put out to beg. Once they're done begging, they'll steal. So they become part of a society's even criminal system. So it really is a tapestry of many, many issues.
Right, and that's all they know, and that's what they've been born into. So they, when we go down to places like Guatemala, and we get to communicate and build relationships with them, they're really seeing and envying us and our society and how we live.
But there's a grace. Don't you think that there's a grace, like with the girls?
Absolutely. I mean, they're just so curious.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know everything. Actually, I spent an hour just singing the Let It Go song from Frozen, because they felt like, they wanted to know all the words, and they wanted to just feel free and just happy and sing. And just even those simple freedoms we take for granted, we don't even think about every day.
We love to call it a first world problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we laugh now. Obviously, every day we're dealing with these issues, and people go, "Oh, it's really hard that you're dealing with these issues." And I think to myself, you're all dealing with them too.
Right.
You're just not aware of them. So when you have a thread of dissatisfaction or angst or anxiety or illness, I mean, we can't be in a world where we're not even thinking about the pesticides that are going on, for instance, the strawberries, but who's spraying that? If a child is spraying those, like all of these different layers, right? So we're still all, directly affected. But for me, what's the most amazing is to think about what these people have been through, the survivors we work with. I'm always in awe because obviously we choose really well-vetted nonprofits that are boots on the ground. They're really doing great work. Obviously they need funding, and it's a disease of economics. So I mean, I'm not shy to say I'm a fundraising organization because this work needs funding. But they always will say, I'm not what happened to me. They don't define themselves with good care and education and rehabilitation by what happened to themselves. And I think to myself, it's so fascinating because I could spend 2 years coaching somebody who went through a divorce who that's all they are, is their story of what happened to them. And they're defined by that past piece of them. And so it's humbling, and it's an honor to work with survivors like that, because I believe that the survivors like that will become the thrivers, and they will ultimately be the ones that end slavery in the 21st century. I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. I'd love it to, but I would like to say that if we collectively come together, it could happen in the 21st century.
And that's where it comes in, where, we just need more people to care. When you were talking about, the girl in India that says, why don't you care? Remember, we do care because you care, Beth. Mm-hmm. And the people that you surround yourself with care. And, so we need more change makers. There's just no ifs, ands, buts about it. And these are just some, go ahead, images.
I want to just share some of the images, and then you can jump in, Kendra. We really are blessed to have a small but mighty and growing community of change agents. And one of the things that I feel is my greatest treasure is my community, and that was many of the people that came to A Life Well Lived to seek out what living well meant for them. And I've always felt services is actually the bridge. Service and forgiveness are the bridge, the keys to your happiness. When you're miserable, go serve somebody else, and you always will. It just takes your mind off your stuff, right? So these change agents, to me, are love in action, and that is our motto here, because it's not good enough to talk. It's not enough to talk. It's not enough to say you care. You have to act. You have to take steps. You have to do things. And so I love these pictures because obviously it warms my heart when we founded Durga, and Jess is to the far left and my husband's below her in the Lacing Up for Freedom image. We got a call from a very good friend of mine, Sarah Simmons, who is the founder and director of something called Made by Survivors in India. And it's Made by Survivors and Durga are partnering for our first Bloom program. And Kendra's going to tell you all a little bit about that in a moment. But when we got a call, it was actually an email, we were told that there were no little girls in many of the villages surrounding some of the tea gardens in the Jalpaiguri, which is the northeastern region of India. And I couldn't believe it. And although I thought I was aware and I carried all this stuff in my shop, it wasn't until we started doing the research. We researched through the UN materials, Polaris. I mean, there's all kinds of materials you can look up and find. We couldn't believe that this epidemic was growing, but that I'm sitting there reading an email, drinking a tea. I never even thought about where my tea came from. It was a February night. I was blown away. I thought, I'm part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. And she was about $40,000 short to create a 6,000 square foot shelter. You take a lot of the fluff and middleman away, you can do a lot with a little bit of money. And I remember calling up people, emailing my community and saying, we have to do something. And it was June of 2013. And at our kitchen table in front of my Durga statue, which we're looking at right now in our office, we named it Durga, our organization, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. And It was from calling people and people calling other people. By November, we'd raised $40,000. And it was not individuals that went, yeah, I'm going to give you a big fat check. Although I'm still waiting for my $1 million check to arrive in the mail. I know it's
I
coming.
think it's on its way.
I think it's in there. I think it's probably in there today. But it's just from a group of change agents who said that they could. And it's been amazing to see these small acts of love build on each other. And I love that you put the garden in here, because I believe that we're creating a garden of hope. We're building, we're planting seeds, and we're creating a tree that people will be sheltered under. So Durga tree was named after the Hindu mother goddess, which is Durga, and she was created by 8 gods. And I'm looking at her as I talk now, and 8 gods couldn't figure out how to eradicate evil. So they had to come together, work together, and create an entity. And they each gave her one of their arms with their weapon or their strength. And then they put her on the king of the jungle in India, which is the tiger. So of course that resonated with my husband and I. But what we loved about that symbol is that it's not going to be one nonprofit. It's not going to be one country. It's not going to be one group of people. It must be many people coming together, working together to eradicate the evils of the world. So she's our symbol of hope, community, and collaboration. And the tree is our symbol of, again, this sheltering, nurturing environment where people are safe to not only survive, but thrive.
So we have this slogan, look, see, act, because, we talk about slavery, we talk about human trafficking, we talk about, the differences between the two and are they the same. And, once we open people's eyes to this growing epidemic, and again, it's growing at an exponential rate. Beth mentioned quickly in the beginning that it is the 2nd largest black market industry in the world. It just surpassed gun trafficking last year. And once even for me, once I started volunteering for Durga, at the time I was just taking time for myself with my daughter. She was 1, and I once you can never not know. I needed to really take this on and feel like I was making a difference. And personally, I have a family member that at the time had a daughter and was missing, and we didn't know where they were for 2 years. And hearing about how the more vulnerable you are, and we're talking about the United States here. It's, again, statistics, we don't like to throw it out there too much, but right now it's 1 in every 5 children that go missing or run away in the United States are being swept into a human trafficking ring. So we're talking about vulnerable women and children, like, this is personal to me, but my sister and my niece, not knowing where they were. They could be doing anything, getting involved in any wrong person, and a lot of it happens on the internet. So now, Sharon, you mentioned before, because of the internet and the way that things are, our technology, our world is becoming smaller and smaller. So, we, again, at Durga Tree International, we are a fundraising organization. We're working on multiple events throughout the year, but this year we're so excited because we're fundraising for our first in-house program, which is Bloom, because we saw, having personal relationships with directors and nonprofits around the world, that there's a gap. These children, these women are rescued, which is great, and they're put into a shelter, which is amazing. Now, they're not on the street, but what happens when they leave the shelter? What happens when they walk out those doors? They're going right back into the lives that they were leading, because those are the only lives that they know. And that's what they're familiar with. And unfortunately, a lot of the traffickers pretend that you're their boyfriend, their father, their, any type of figure that they can, because what's happening now is 50% of the traffickers today are women. And a lot of them in the United States are couples. And so again, it's going back to, don't trust anyone. It's not, but you never know.
I say you should trust everyone with open eyes. You need to be aware and educated. And I think that's what we're so excited is that what we're seeing that we can offer so many of the great shelters and organizations that we work with is this component that they're just struggling to stay afloat. It's very expensive to build and maintain a shelter, to handle rescue and legal care. And there's also a lot of emotional intake for not only the social worker or those working with survivors, but for the survivors themselves. The sad fact is many of them have disease because of the form of trafficking. If they're in the mines, they could get TB, or I think it's leukemia. I don't hold me to that. But there's many forms of cancer that they get from being exposed in the fields, in the mines, to chemicals. If they're sexually exploited, so many of them have AIDS and are dying of these diseases. So when they're rescued and they're initially taken in, that's a huge component. They have to get these survivors past that piece. But then how do they, like Kendra said, how do they get them out of the cycle? And we thought that the best thing we could do is, instead of just putting a Band-Aid on a problem and giving them some money to keep the shelter open, we could create a model where we were honoring the culture that this was happening, whether it's Guatemala, India, Africa, and we could continue their education and give them an economic skill and make it so that they were creating a product that not only told their story, but that had value, that also gets imported here to the United States and helps us to further our education in fair trade, survivor-made goods. There's so many great products out there.
Someone asked a question, how can, I think it's really enlightening this, but how can we buy goods and know what sellers use safe and humane labor practices?
That's a very complex question, and I'm really glad that they asked that, because we have to keep asking more questions. President Obama recently signed an act. If you go on to our in the press section of our Durga Tree International website and you look at the CNBC article, there's links all through that article that CNBC did with us about the new acts of importation and exportation of slave-made goods and how our country's coming down. But if consumer demand is still there, it's going to exist. We also have a slavery-free shopping guide on our website. So it's, we're always evolving. If we find out that somebody's isn't living up to their thing, we'll take them off. But we're doing the best that we can. Again, we are a staff of 2 people and a bunch of volunteers right now.
And in doing that, putting that together, we learned that just because it says made in the USA doesn't mean it's not
because you're importing all of these. Again, that's what I said about self-consumption. If the natural resource is coming from someplace where a child's been forced in labor, or the cotton's been grown by Monsanto,
or the fabric is coming from a place, just because you put it together in the United States, but where did all of these raw materials come from?
But there's a really exciting trend that is happening, and so to answer this particular person's question, there is an exciting trend that's happening. If you look on EcoAge, or Lydia Firth, it's Colin Firth's wife, she's got an Instagram page where she's constantly educating people about the interconnectedness of our consumer goods. Why would we buy something if we're not going to wear it 30 times? Why do we need these things? And so as this conversation is happening, the trends are beginning to change. We just can't lose interest. We're kind of a fickle society. Like, we stay on something for a week and then the next thing happens and we move off of it.
Or even like when the Super Bowl in New Jersey happened a couple of years ago, human trafficking, maybe the individuals that are on this webinar can respond, but if you heard about human trafficking when the Super Bowl was at Giant Stadium, it's because these nonprofits in our state came together, and including us, and wrapped soaps and numbers on where to call, where to find help. But then the Super Bowl ended.
And it trickles away.
And
so one of the things that everyone says, why is freedom your cause? You must care about these other things that are happening. Cancer, heart disease. My mother has Alzheimer's disease. My brother died of heart failure at 24. So those are things I care about. Homelessness. I mean, obviously poverty is a big thing for me. But one of the reasons why I get to care about them is because I have choice. Because I'm free. I have choice to do that. I have choice to go to college or not. I have choice to change my job or not. I have choice to have Verizon or AT&T as my phone service. I have choice. I feel that our freedom, our personal freedom, is our first basic human right. And without that, how can we do anything else in this world? And so as a woman who recognizes that our choice, our right to vote, our right to choose, any of that is so new for us, even here in the United States, it's something I value and I hold very, very closely. And I believe that I have to fight for other people to have that choice. I mean, look at what happened in Orlando. I'm devastated by that. Our freedom is our cause because it's our first basic human fundamental right, especially here in the United States.
And I know we only have a couple minutes before we're wrapping this up, and we've really used up all this time because obviously you notice that there's so much information to share, and we really just got the tip of the iceberg here. So does anybody else in attendance have any questions that we can maybe quickly answer?
If anybody has them, they can type them in quickly. If you don't type quickly or you have other questions, you can ask them in the survey after the webinar that you'll get. So
Actually, I have a quick follow-up question. So as far as the shopping goes, so when you see a product and it doesn't say fair trade, does that automatically mean that it's not? Or are there items that...
I know, it's not as black and white and cut and dry in that, but that is my general rule of thumb because there is a Fair Trade Association that they do a lot of the research on these different companies and manufacturers and where things come from. So they will put their seal, their Fair Trade Association seal on these items, but unless the company is open to letting them do that research from start to finish, then so there could so when I talk about it, if there's a Fair Trade Association seal on it, and if something does not have that seal, more than likely it's not, because what type of company doesn't want to ride this new trade, this new trend of being fair trade?
And we'll begin to see more of that with companies like the larger companies, but that's social pressure. With the International Labor Organization meeting about child labor, there's been some exposés on some of our big companies, and I don't want to mention names because I don't believe in slamming companies like that, but if you do the research just out there in the internet, you can find it. Those companies will get on board. They will start better practices if they feel that their bottom line is going to be affected. But we have the power to affect the bottom line.
That's why I'm like, that is one of my dreams, is 10, 15 years from now, things don't have to have a Fair Trade Association seal on it because it's all fair trade. But, I really want to make sure that I tell you all where to find information. Please go to durgatreeinternational.org. We have multiple pages on there, like our, slave-free shopping page, but our event page also. If you want to get involved in something that we've already created, we have our 4th annual gala coming on October 1st. The past 3 years, we've done really well, and it's an exclusive event. And this year, it's a speakeasy theme. So it's going to be a casino night, a secret location on the farm, and we're always looking for people to attend, sponsors, advertisers. So definitely check out our event page.
Yeah, your dollars have power, and when you support an organization like Durga, we're able to implement the Bloom program because again, we don't need $1 million to do it. We can do so much for so little, and in many parts of the world. We've already built that shelter, by the way. We're actively working on the 3rd floor. We're working on building a school in West Cameroon, Africa. We've done stuff here in the United States. So definitely take a look at our website, but stay in touch with us. We're on social media, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram.
And we're real people. So when you call or email us, we'll get back to you. And if you want to meet us in person, we're going to be at the American Labor Museum on September 24th, and we're doing a special survivor art gallery, and there'll also be some photography and everything. It's on display for
3 months.
For 3 months.
From
Labor Day.
That's right in Haledon. So.
So really accessible. Come and check us out. So thank you so much.
No,
Amy.
thank you. Thank
everyone
you,
in
Beth.
attendance.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope you enjoyed it. If you do have any questions, because you may have questions when you think about it, just type them in on your survey, and we'll give them to Kendra and Beth, and they can get back to you.
Yeah.
So thank you both for presenting. Thank you for your questions and your intro. And we hope we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.